Thank you, author of the Frescont channel. I never thought I'd be standing over my own son's casket at just 5 years old. No parent ever does. But there I was, staring at the small, white box that now held Liam, his favorite blue blanket tucked in beside him. He always said it made him feel safe, something I had failed to give him when it mattered most. That realization crushed me far more than the hushed whispers drifting from the pews behind me. They weren't just mourning Liam, they were dissecting me, picking apart my life with sharp, knowing glances. I could feel their stares burning into the back of my skull, their speculation cutting deep. Where's his wife? I could almost hear them murmuring. How could she not be here? Small towns thrive on gossip, and I knew Madison's absence would only fuel their conversations. But they had no idea what I knew. Just minutes before stepping into the church, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. I glanced at it instinctively, expecting a condolence or some logistical question about the service. Instead, what I saw sent a chill through me. The image was so sharp it could have been taken seconds ago. Madison, stretched out by a pool, her skin glowing under the Hawaiian sun. A man, young, tanned, and way too comfortable, had his arm draped around her. A cocktail sat in her manicured hand. And below the photo, a message. Thought you should see what your wife is really doing today. A concerned friend. For a split second, my brain refused to make the connection. The woman in that picture, the woman I had built a life with, couldn't be the same person who was supposed to be sitting next to me in the front row, grieving with me. But she wasn't. Madison wasn't at an important business meeting like she had told me. She wasn't here, holding my hand as we laid our son to rest. She was thousands of miles away, sipping margaritas in paradise, tangled up with some stranger. The betrayal hit instantly, but there was no time to process it. My mother's hand tightened around my arm as she whispered, "Ethan, you're shaking." She was right. My phone trembled in my grip until I shoved it into my pocket, as if burying it would make the image disappear. It didn't. It was seared into my mind, flashing every time I blinked. Still, I couldn't break, not now. I forced the rage down, swallowing it like glass, and gave the funeral director a nod. Somehow, my legs carried me to the front pew, where Madison should have been. I sat, back straight, head high, refusing to give the town the satisfaction of watching me crumble. But inside, my thoughts were a mess, racing through the past few months, desperate to make sense of it all. Madison's late-night phone calls. Her sudden urgent work trips. The way she had started talking about needing space right when Liam's condition worsened. I had chalked it up to grief, assuming we were just coping differently. I had been a fool. As the service began, I clenched my fists, nails digging into my palms just to keep myself together. The pastor spoke about Liam's love for life, how his energy never faded, even in the hardest moments of his illness. My chest tightened when the pastor mentioned Liam's favorite pastime, coloring his white roses with food dye. In that instant, I could almost see him again, his little hands stained blue and purple, his laughter filling the hospital room. My gaze drifted to the bouquet on his casket, white roses everywhere. Madison had always hated them, called them too plain. But I didn't choose them for her. I chose them for Liam. She didn't deserve to be part of this moment anyway. Then my phone buzzed again. Another message. This time, from Madison. Sorry I couldn't make it. Important business meeting. I'll make it up to you. Make it up to me? Make up for skipping her own son's funeral? For sipping cocktails in paradise while I stood here, burying Liam? A fresh wave of rage surged through me, scorching through the grief, if only for a second. And in that moment, one thought crystallized in my mind: she had no idea what was coming. She expected me to crumble, to play the grieving widower she could manipulate. But I wouldn't. Madison had abandoned us when Liam needed her most, and I would make damn sure her betrayal didn't go unanswered. That silent promise solidified as I rose to deliver the eulogy. I scanned the crowd, neighbors, coworkers, family, friends, all watching, waiting. I forced myself to speak. Every word was for Liam. Every story about his joy, his strength, his boundless energy was my vow to protect his memory. Madison's actions wouldn't taint his legacy. I wouldn't let them. Not once did my voice waver. I didn't shed a single tear. Those were for later, when I was alone. Today wasn't about my pain, or about Madison's betrayal. Today was about Liam. But deep down, I knew one thing for certain. Madison thought she could walk away unscathed. She was wrong. So very wrong. The funeral reception was a farce. People shuffled through my parents' living room, murmuring empty condolences, their voices coated in rehearsed sympathy. Plates of untouched cookies and casseroles cluttered every surface, a grotesque display of tradition. And the whispers, God, the whispers. They made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. Everyone knew Madison hadn't been there. And their silence spoke louder than any words ever could. I drifted through the room like a ghost, offering stiff smiles to neighbors, nodding absently at distant relatives. Their sympathy wasn't what I needed. It wasn't what I wanted. I wanted honesty. I wanted someone to look me in the eye, grab my arm. They had seen the photo too. They knew what she was doing, what she had become. But no one said a word. Madison's parents, Vicky and Rick, lingered near the kitchen, their presence as unwelcome as their judgmental stares. They had barely spoken to me all day, yet I could feel their silent accusations. To them, I had always been the problem, never attentive enough, never devoted enough. Madison was their golden child, and nothing she did could ever tarnish that perfect image. Vicky finally approached as I stood by the mantel, staring at a framed photo of Liam. It was one of my favorites. His gap-toothed grin stretched wide as he proudly held up the results of one of his science experiments. The petals of a white rose had turned a striking shade of blue, his little hands streaked with food coloring. He had been so proud that day. I tightened my grip on the frame, the cool glass pressing into my palms. Ethan, Vicky said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness, though her sharp eyes betrayed her true feelings. You've been so strong today. It's a shame Madison couldn't be here, but she's grieving in her own way. You know how difficult this has been for her. Difficult for her? My grip on the frame tightened as I turned to face her. She studied me with a faint look of concern, the kind that barely concealed her judgment. Every word felt like a slap, each syllable digging into the raw anger coiling in my chest. I'm sure it has, I replied, my voice colder than I intended. Though I imagine Hawaii is a nice distraction from all the difficulty. For the briefest second, Vicky's expression wavered. Her lips pressed into a thin line, but she recovered quickly. Ethan, grief makes people act out of character, she said smoothly. Madison needed some space to process everything. You should try to be more understanding. Understanding? My jaw clenched, my pulse pounding in my ears. She didn't know. Or maybe she did, and simply didn't care. I wanted to pull out my phone, shove the picture in her face, and force her to acknowledge the truth. But I didn't. Instead, I turned away, carefully setting Liam's photo back on the mantel with trembling hands. Then, my mother appeared beside me. Her presence grounded me in a way nothing else could. Vicky, she said, her voice firm, slicing through the tension like a blade. I think you've said enough. Vicky bristled but didn't argue. Instead, she turned and retreated to the kitchen, leaving my mother and me in heavy silence. Don't let her get to you, Mom said quietly, resting a reassuring hand on my arm. She's just trying to deflect. She knows what Madison has done. Her words hit like a punch to the gut. You think she knows? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Mom let out a weary sigh. She's her mother, she said simply. Of course she knows. That confirmation was all I needed. This wasn't just Madison's betrayal, it was a family affair. Vicky and Rick had likely known all along and had chosen to protect Madison rather than hold her accountable. The thought made my blood boil. As the reception dragged on, the weight of it all became unbearable. I needed air, space, anything to clear my head. So I slipped away into my father's study, desperate for a moment of quiet. Sinking into his worn leather chair, exhaustion settled over me like a lead blanket. My mind raced, fragments of memories flashing through my head, each one tangled with questions I didn't yet have the answers to. The business trips. The late-night phone calls. The way Madison had started pulling away, not just from me, but from Liam. At first, it had been subtle. A missed doctor's appointment here. A forgotten bedtime story there. But over time, it became clear, she hadn't just checked out. She had left us long before today. I had blamed it on stress, told myself that Liam's illness had worn Madison down, that the distance between us was just grief manifesting in different ways. Never once did I suspect there was something darker lurking beneath it all. Pulling out my phone, I stared at the image again. Madison, basking in the Hawaiian sun, wrapped up in the arms of another man. My thumb hovered over the delete button, but I couldn't do it. This wasn't just proof of her betrayal. It was a reminder of exactly what I was up against. I didn't know what my next move would be, but one thing was certain. I wouldn't let her walk away from this. Not after abandoning me. Not after abandoning Liam. She thought she could slip away, untouched by the consequences of her actions. She was wrong. Sitting there in the dim glow of the study, my anger hardened into something colder, something more resolute. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice. For Liam. For me. For everything we lost because of her selfishness. She would regret ever thinking she could betray us and walk away unscathed. The days after the funeral blurred together, condolences, casseroles, and sleepless nights. People came and went, murmuring the same hollow phrases over and over. He's in a better place now. At least he's not suffering anymore. As if any of that could bring me comfort. What better place could there be than here, in my arms, giggling over cartoons or demanding pancakes for dinner? Their well-meaning words only deepened the hollow ache inside me. Grief clung to me like a second skin. But beneath it, something else churned, something dark and relentless. That damn picture of Madison wouldn't leave my mind. Every time I closed my eyes, it was there, taunting me. She hadn't just skipped Liam's funeral, she had celebrated her freedom, as if our son's death had been nothing more than her ticket to paradise. I needed a distraction. Anything to keep from drowning in it. So, I busied myself with sorting through Liam's room, touching his things, trying to cling to the pieces of him still left behind. His favorite stuffed penguin lay on the bed, worn and lopsided from years of love. I picked it up, its familiar weight hitting me like a punch to the gut. He had carried it everywhere, even to the hospital. As I placed it gently on his pillow, something across the room caught my eye. A stack of papers on Madison's desk. That wasn't like her. Madison didn't leave things out. Her life was a perfectly curated checklist, color-coded and methodical. Curiosity, or maybe instinct, pulled me closer. I reached for the top sheet, and the second I saw what it was, my blood ran cold. A life insurance policy. Liam's name was printed in bold letters at the top. Madison's name was listed as the sole beneficiary. My heart slammed against my ribs as I flipped through the pages, each one more damning than the last. The policy was worth $1 million. And she had taken it out just 6 months after Liam's diagnosis. I had never been consulted. Never even seen these papers before. But what hit me hardest was the amendment, dated just weeks before Liam died. Madison had removed me as a beneficiary. Her signature stared back at me, a quiet, calculated betrayal written in ink. My hands shook as I rifled through the rest of the stack. Receipts, loan statements, proof that she had already borrowed against the policy. She had planned for this. And suddenly, I realized, Madison hadn't just abandoned us. She had cashed in. She had spent the money. On what? Plane tickets. Cocktails by the pool. Her lover's expensive tastes. I sank into the chair, my eyes locked on the mess of papers in front of me. This wasn't just betrayal. It was theft. Madison hadn't just walked away, she had looted our family, drained the last remnants of what we had built, and used it to fund her escape. The realization hit like a freight train. Liam's death hadn't just ended my son's life. It had ended my marriage. And Madison had buried it right alongside him. A sharp buzz cut through the silence, making me flinch. My phone vibrated against the desk, an unlisted number flashing on the screen. For a second, I considered ignoring it, but something, call it instinct, told me to pick up. Hello? My voice was rough, worn down by grief and fury. A pause. Then, a woman's voice, unfamiliar, hesitant, but threaded with urgency. I need to talk to you. I gripped the phone tighter. Who is this? My name's Sophia. Another pause, like she was debating how much to say. I know what she's been doing. I know about Hawaii. And I know you're not going to like what I have to tell you. My chest tightened. Why should I trust you? You shouldn't. Her answer was immediate. But you should hear me out. Meet me at the coffee shop on Main. Now. The line went dead. I lowered the phone, staring at the screen as if it could give me more answers. Sophia. The name didn't ring a bell, but the urgency in her voice was impossible to ignore. Part of me hesitated. What if this was a mistake? What if she was some crank with too much time on her hands? But another part, the one that couldn't stop replaying that photo of Madison in Hawaii, pushed me forward. I needed answers. And whoever Sophia was, she had them. I grabbed the stack of papers, shoving them into a folder. If Sophia had information, I wouldn't walk in empty-handed. I wanted proof. Evidence. Something I could throw back in Madison's face when the time came. As I stepped toward the door, I glanced back at Liam's room. His stuffed penguin sat on the bed, a silent witness to everything crumbling around me. I swallowed hard, gripping the doorknob. I'll make this right, I promised him, though I wasn't sure how. What I didn't realize then was that this meeting wouldn't just confirm my suspicions. It would open a door to something far worse, something I hadn't even begun to imagine. The coffee shop on Main was the kind of place Madison would have turned her nose up at. Plain, unassuming, nothing like the sleek, overpriced cafes she preferred. As I stepped inside, the scent of burnt coffee beans and stale pastries filled the air. One glance around the room, and I spotted her immediately. Sophia. She sat in the far corner by the window, her auburn hair pulled into a neat ponytail, posture stiff. She didn't look up as I approached. Instead, she stirred her coffee, slow, deliberate circles, like she was bracing herself. A phone sat face down on the table. Beside it, a small notebook. And I had the sinking feeling that whatever was inside it would change everything. I slid into the chair across from her, dropping my folder onto the table with a dull thud. Sophia finally looked up, her green eyes sharp and assessing. Didn't think you'd show, she said, voice low but steady. You have 5 minutes to explain why I'm here, I replied, leaning back, arms crossed. She arched an eyebrow, unfazed. Fair enough. I'll get straight to the point. She did. Your wife, Madison, has been seeing my ex-boyfriend for over a year. The words hit like a punch to the gut, but I didn't flinch. I already know that, I said flatly, though the bitterness in my voice betrayed me. Sophia tilted her head, her tone edged with mockery. Oh, you know? She let the words hang for a second before pressing forward. Do you know about the money? Or how they're planning to use it to start their little dream life together in Maui? I froze. What money? Sophia leaned in, her expression unreadable. The life insurance payout. The $1 million your wife secured after removing your son's name from the policy. She promised half of it to Brandon, my ex, so they could buy a beachfront property together. My stomach twisted. I wanted to call her a liar. I wanted to shove my chair back, walk out, pretend this was just some desperate attempt at revenge. But I didn't. I stayed. Fingers digging into the table's edge. And how exactly do you know all this? Sophia smirked, but there was no humor in it. Brandon isn't exactly discreet. He's been bragging about it for weeks. At first, I thought he was exaggerating. Madison always struck me as too polished for a guy like him. But then he started showing me proof. She pulled out her phone, scrolling with quick precision before sliding it across the table. Text messages filled the screen. From Madison. Madison, the payout came through. It's more than enough. We'll be out of here by the end of the month. Brandon, Maui's waiting, babe. Just don't let him suspect anything. Madison, he's too broken to see straight. It's already done. My chest tightened, breath coming shallow as I read each line. The Madison in those messages wasn't the woman I married. She was cold. Calculating. Detached. I thought he was full of shit, Sophia continued. But then I found more. Bank transfers. Flight itineraries. Even a picture of the house they're planning to buy. She's been funneling the money into an account with both their names on it. I stared at her, mind reeling. Why are you telling me this? Sophia's gaze hardened. Because she's playing both of us. I didn't speak, just let her words sink in. Madison promised Brandon a fresh start, but I've seen the way she operates. The moment she doesn't need him anymore, she'll drop him, just like she's dropping you. Her lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. And just like she dropped me. Her words hung in the air, sharp and bitter. I didn't trust her. Not completely. But I couldn't ignore the evidence staring back at me. Madison thought she could erase Liam, erase me, and start over. She was wrong. So very, very wrong. She was laying it all out in front of me. What do you want from me? My voice was low, measured, but the tension beneath it was impossible to hide. Sophia leaned back, crossing her arms. Revenge. Justice. Call it whatever you want. Her eyes burned with something fierce and unrelenting. Brandon doesn't get to walk away scot-free. And Madison? She sure as hell doesn't either. You want to bring them down? I can help. But we have to act fast. I studied her, searching for any flicker of deception. She met my gaze head-on, unflinching. I didn't trust her motivations. There was too much anger behind her words, too much venom. But I knew one thing for certain: Madison had lied to me. Stolen from me. Betrayed me in ways I hadn't even begun to comprehend. I'm in, I said finally, my voice like steel. Sophia nodded, her expression softening slightly. Good. Because this is just the beginning. She reached into her bag and pulled out a thick envelope, sliding it across the table. Everything you need to know is in here: names, dates, bank accounts. It's all connected. We just have to find the right thread to pull. I picked it up, feeling the weight of it match the heaviness settling in my chest. As I stood to leave, Sophia called after me. Ethan. I paused, glancing back at her. Her voice softened. I'm sorry about your son. For what it's worth, I think Madison's the one who's broken. Not you. Her words lingered as I stepped into the cold night air. My mind raced. Next steps. Strategy. The ways I could make Madison and Brandon pay for what they'd done. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming what little dignity I had left. It was about protecting Liam's memory from the people who thought they could profit from his death. They had no idea who they were up against. I spent the night buried in the envelopes Sophia had given me. A maze of text messages, bank statements, and photos, each one a fresh betrayal. Every page confirmed what I already feared: Madison wasn't just running off with her lover. She was a schemer. A strategist. And her betrayal ran deeper than I had ever imagined. The money trail was damning. Deposits and transfers into an account I didn't recognize, all under Madison's name, all linked directly to Brandon. But what stopped me cold was the evidence of collaboration. Vicky and Rick. Madison's parents. Their names appeared in emails, on checks tied to business ventures that didn't exist. I should have seen it earlier, the way they coddled Madison, treating her like she could do no wrong. How they'd always blamed me for our marriage problems, subtly undermining me with snide remarks disguised as advice. But now I realized they hadn't just been enabling her. They had been helping her. And then I found it. An email exchange. Vicky, Ethan won't suspect a thing. He's too focused on Liam. Just make sure the papers are signed before he catches on. Madison, he won't notice. He's too broken to care. And once it's done, it's done. The papers. What papers? My pulse pounded as I flipped through more documents, searching, then stopping cold. A property transfer agreement. For our family home. The house where I grew up. The house where Liam spent his final days. Madison was selling it. She wasn't just leaving. She was erasing everything. Burning down the life we built and cashing in on the ashes. And I wasn't going to let her. Madison had forged my signature. She made it look like I had agreed to sell the house. They were planning to take everything, the insurance payout, the house, even our joint savings. I could almost hear Vicky's sharp, dismissive voice in my head: it's what's best for Madison. The anger I had been holding back exploded, but I had no outlet. I paced the living room, fists clenched, my breath ragged. They thought they could manipulate me. That my grief would blind me. They thought they could steal everything I had left and walk away unscathed. They were wrong. By morning, a plan was beginning to take shape. I needed more proof. More leverage. And I knew exactly where to start. My mother, always my anchor, had been hinting at things for days. Things she'd seen. Suspicions she had. If anyone could help me connect the dots, it was her. I found her in the kitchen, a steaming cup of tea in her hands. She looked up as I entered, her sharp eyes narrowing immediately. "What's wrong?" she asked, setting the cup down. "They're trying to sell the house," I said bluntly. "Madison and her parents. They forged my signature." Her face tightened, lips pressing into a thin line. "I knew it," she muttered. "You knew?" I asked, stepping closer. "I suspected," she admitted. "Vicky's been sniffing around for months, asking questions about the property. She even tried to get your father to sign something when he was confused. But I intercepted it." That hit me like a punch to the gut. My father, his memory slipping more every day, had been another pawn in their game. They had no shame. No limits. "She said it was just a precaution," my mother continued, her voice trembling with anger. "But I didn't trust her. I kept the papers. They're in the study." She didn't need to say more. I hurried into the study, rifling through the drawers until my hands closed around the documents. There it was. A legal form authorizing the sale of the house. At the bottom, my father's signature. A forgery. "They thought he wouldn't remember," my mother said from behind me. "They thought I wouldn't notice. But I've been watching them, Ethan. Vicky's always been manipulative, but this is something else." I sank into the chair, the weight of everything crashing down. "They're not just after the money," I said quietly. "They're after everything. The house. The savings. Everything Liam and I loved." My mother placed a hand on my shoulder, her grip firm. "Then don't let them win," she said. "Fight back." Her words lit a fire inside me. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about Liam. His memory. His legacy. Madison and her family thought they could outmaneuver me. They thought I was too broken to fight. They underestimated one thing. My resolve. They wanted to play games? Fine. But I wasn't going to sit back and let them take everything. If they thought I was weak, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. The rest of the day, I gathered every piece of evidence I could find. Bank records. Emails. Documents from Sophia's envelope. Slowly, it all came together. Madison and her parents had been planning this for months, maybe longer. They had been careful. Calculating. But they had made mistakes. And I was going to exploit every single one of them. When night fell, I sat in Liam's room, his stuffed penguin in my hands. I traced the worn fabric, the seams loose from years of love. This had been his favorite. His comfort. And now, it was all I had left of him. I closed my eyes, gripping the penguin tighter. "I won't let them erase you." The storm inside me settled into something cold. Determined. Madison thought she had won. But the game had only just begun. "I'll fix this," I whispered into the darkness. "I promise you, Liam. I won't let them take what's ours." The storm inside me had settled, but not into peace, into something colder. Sharper. More dangerous. Madison and her family thought they could destroy me. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. I wasn't just grieving. I was preparing. Madison believed she was untouchable, that her meticulous lies, the forged documents, and the money funneled into secret accounts had covered every angle. She thought she had outmaneuvered me. But she hadn't counted on one thing. Me. That's the beauty of being underestimated, it gives you an advantage. And after seeing just how far Madison and her parents were willing to go, I realized one truth. I had to strike first. The house was the key. It wasn't just property, it was a piece of my family's soul. My father built it with his own hands, one nail, one board at a time. It was where I grew up, where Liam learned to walk, where we spent endless nights holding him through the worst of his illness. It was sacred. And Madison? She wanted to sell it. To bankroll her escape. That morning I made a call. Nate. We'd been friends since high school, back when we argued cases on the debate team. Now, He was a sharp-as-hell attorney. And he owed me a favor. "Ethan," he said after I laid everything out. His tone was serious. "This is messy. If they forged your signature, we can fight the sale, but we need more than your word. We need proof. Witnesses. Documents. Anything to show a pattern of deceit." "I've got plenty," I replied, picturing the stack of evidence Sophia had handed over and the forged papers my mother had intercepted. "But I need to know how we stop this before it's too late." Nate sighed on the other end of the line. "We need to move fast. If they finalize the sale before we act, undoing it will be a nightmare. Let me pull some strings, dig into the legal filings. In the meantime, gather everything you can. Don't leave anything to chance." The clock was ticking. Madison and her parents weren't wasting time. And neither could I. I started by laying out everything Sophia had given me, pinning it to the corkboard in my father's study like a detective piecing together a case. Bank transfers. Emails. Photos. Each one a nail in Madison S. coffin. But I needed more. My mother was my first ally. She had been watching Vicky's manipulations for months, and she was more than ready to fight back. "Your father might not remember everything clearly," she said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "But I do. Vicky and Rick tried to pressure him into signing those papers more than once. I kept notes. Every time they showed up here unannounced, every shady conversation, I wrote it all down." She handed me a small notebook, the pages filled with dates, detailed accounts of their visits, and every underhanded trick they had tried. More evidence. Another layer to the case I was building. Next, I reached out to Sophia. As much as I hated relying on her, she had insight into Madison S. plans that I couldn't ignore. "They're meeting with the realtor tomorrow to finalize the sale," she said over the phone. "If you're going to stop them, you need to be there." My grip tightened around the phone. "How do you know this?" There was a pause. Then Sophia's voice, calm but laced with something bitter. "Because Madison doesn't think I'm a threat." I could almost hear the smirk in her voice. "She keeps me in the loop, thinking I'll just go along with it." Madison thought she had played everyone. She had no idea what was coming. But she had no idea that I was already one step ahead of her. The bitterness in her voice was unmistakable, and while I couldn't fully trust her, I had to admit she was right about one thing: Madison had underestimated both of us. With everything finally falling into place, I spent the rest of the day getting ready. I copied every document, recorded every crucial detail, and made sure to have backups of everything. There was no way I was leaving anything to chance. By the time night fell, my study looked like a war zone, papers scattered, plans laid out, every angle covered. My mother walked in, a cup of tea in hand, and placed it beside me. "You've got that look in your eye," she said, watching me carefully. I glanced up from the corkboard. "What look?" She gave me a faint smile. "The same look your father used to get when someone tried to cheat him out of a deal." Her expression grew serious. "Don't let them take this from us, Ethan. Don't let them take Liam's home." Her words hit me like a bolt of lightning. This wasn't just about me. It wasn't even just about the house. This was about protecting what Liam had loved, what he had left behind. The anger I'd felt over Madison's betrayal sharpened into something colder, more focused. "They won't," I promised. The next morning, I dressed like a man preparing for battle, suit pressed, tie knotted, folder in hand. Nate had already filed a motion to halt the sale, but I knew that wouldn't be enough. I had to show up. I had to face them. As I reached the door, my mother stopped me and placed something small in my hand, a worn stuffed penguin. "Take it with you," she said softly. "For luck." I slipped it into my briefcase, the familiar weight grounding me. It wasn't just a toy. It was a piece of Liam, a reminder of his laughter, his resilience, and the love Madison had so easily discarded. When I pulled up to the realtor's office, Madison's car was already parked out front. Inside, she and Vicky sat at the table, their polished smiles masking months of deception. "Ethan," Madison said, feigning surprise as I walked in. "What are you doing here?" Without a word, I set the folder down on the table and flipped it open, revealing the evidence of their fraud. "Stopping you," I said coldly. The look on her face was priceless. But this wasn't over. Not even close. Madison's face drained of color the second she saw the documents. She wasn't ready for this. None of them were. Vicky, usually so smug, suddenly looked uneasy, her eyes darting between the pages spread out before her. The realtor, caught in the middle of a battle he never signed up for, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "What is this?" Madison asked, her voice laced with fake confusion. But the slight tremor in it gave her away. "You tell me," I replied, leaning forward. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like proof that you and your mother have been forging documents, siphoning money, and trying to sell this house right out from under me." Vicky's lips thinned. "Ethan, there's no need for dramatics. This is just a simple real estate matter." "A simple real estate matter?" I shot back, my voice rising. "This is my home, Vicky. My family's home. And you tried to take it away by forging my signature. Did you think I wouldn't notice? Or did you think I was too broken to fight back?" Madison shifted in her seat, her polished confidence starting to crack. "Ethan, please. We've been under a lot of stress. We were just trying to handle things while you were grieving." I slammed my hand down on the table, making everyone jump. "Don't you dare use Liam's death to justify this." My voice was steady, but the fury behind it was unmistakable. "While I was burying my son, you were plotting to steal everything we built together." "And for what?" "So you could run off with Brandon and live your little fantasy life in Hawaii?" Her eyes widened. I'd hit a nerve. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly." I cut her off. "I understand that you've been lying to me for months. I understand that you've been funneling money into secret accounts. And I understand that you're willing to destroy what little I have left, all for some cheap thrill." Vicky opened her mouth to interject, but I wasn't done yet. But I wasn't done. "And you," I said, turning to Vicky, my voice sharp. "You've been complicit in all of this, manipulating my father, forging signatures, covering for Madison while she tore this family apart. Did you really think I wouldn't figure it out?" For the first time, Vicky looked shaken. "Ethan, you're being unreasonable," she said, her voice lacking its usual confidence. "We were only trying to protect Madison's interests. You've been unstable since Liam's death." "Unstable?" I let out a bitter laugh. "You mean grieving? Mourning my son, the boy I loved more than anything, while Madison was busy planning her escape? If anyone's unstable, it's her. And you for enabling her." The realtor cleared his throat, looking like he deeply regretted showing up to work that day. I think I should step out." "No," I said sharply, turning to him. "You're about to see just how illegal this so-called real estate matter really is." I pulled out my phone and pressed play. The room filled with the unmistakable voices of Madison and Brandon, caught in a conversation Sophia had secretly recorded. "Madison. The payout's in the account. Once the house sells, we'll have enough for the down payment on the Maui place." Brandon. "What about Ethan?" Madison. "He's too distracted to notice. He'll never see it coming." Silence. Heavy. Suffocating. Madison's face drained of color, turning a sickly shade of white. Vicky's carefully composed mask cracked wide open. "You recorded me?" Madison whispered, her voice barely audible. I leaned back in my chair. "No," I said coolly. "But someone who knew exactly what kind of person you are did. And she was more than happy to help me expose you." Madison's eyes darted toward the door, like she was considering making a run for it. "You can't prove anything," she said weakly. "Oh, but I can." I slid another set of documents across the table. Bank statements, emails, proof of forged signatures. Every shady transaction. Every fraudulent document. Every lie. "It's all here," I continued. "And Nate has already filed a motion to halt the sale. This house isn't going anywhere." The silence stretched on, thick with tension. Madison turned to Vicky, but for once, her mother had no words to save her. "You thought I'd just roll over and let you win," I said, my voice steady, unwavering. "But you underestimated me. You always have. That ends now." Vicky opened her mouth to respond, but before she could get a word out, the door swung open. Nate stepped inside, a stack of legal documents in his hands. "Sorry I'm late," he said casually. I was just at the courthouse filing an injunction to freeze all property transactions tied to this house. He set the papers down on the table and turned to the realtor. You might want to walk away from this deal. It's about to get messy. The realtor didn't need to be told twice. I think that's my cue to leave, he muttered, grabbing his briefcase and practically running out the door. With him gone, I turned back to Madison and Vicky. You have two choices, I said, my tone firm. You can walk away now, leave this house and whatever scheme you had planned behind. Or you can fight me, and I'll make sure both of you end up in court and on the front page of every newspaper in town. Madison stared at me, the last remnants of her composure crumbling. For the first time, I saw it, fear in her eyes. The mask she had worn for so long was gone. Vicky, however, wasn't ready to surrender. You're bluffing, she spat, her voice laced with defiance. I met her gaze without flinching. Try me. Madison grabbed Vicky's arm, her voice urgent. Mom, stop. He's not bluffing. Vicky hesitated, but the look in Madison's eyes told her everything she needed to know. Without another word, they rose from their seats and walked out. The confidence they once carried, the arrogance that had fueled their schemes, was gone. Their steps, once so sure, now faltered with uncertainty. As the door shut behind them, I let out a breath I hadn't even realized I was holding. Nate clapped me on the back. You did good, he said. But I wasn't celebrating. Not yet. This was just one battle. The war was far from over. The fallout began the moment Madison and Vicky stepped out of the realtor's office. They had abandoned the smugness they once wore like armor, their carefully crafted facade shattered. But for me, that moment wasn't the end, it was just the beginning. The confrontation had stopped the sale of the house, but the damage they had tried to inflict ran far deeper than I had initially realized. Nate wasted no time, immediately filing motions to freeze all joint assets and accounts. They're not just after the house, Ethan, he told me later that day as we sat in his office. They've been playing a long game, trying to drain everything you own. If we don't act fast, they could still slip through the cracks. I nodded, the weight of his words settling in. What's our next move? We expose them, he said simply. All of them, Madison, Vicky, Rick. Everyone who had a hand in this. We hit them with fraud charges, property theft, and anything else we can prove. The prospect was daunting, but I was ready. This wasn't just about justice for me anymore, it was about protecting Liam's memory. It was about making sure Madison and her family faced the consequences of their actions. The first step was gathering more evidence. Nate and I combed through every document, email, and financial transaction we could find, determined to build an airtight case. Sophia proved to be an invaluable ally, providing even more damning information about Madison's secret accounts and her relationship with Brandon. You don't realize how much she bragged to him, Sophia said during one of our meetings. She thought he was her partner in crime. But Brandon? He was careless. He left a trail everywhere he went. The evidence painted an even darker picture of Madison's betrayal. She hadn't just siphoned money from Liam's life insurance, she had also funneled funds from our joint savings, fabricating fake expenses to cover her tracks. Vicky and Rick had been complicit every step of the way, using their influence to manipulate legal documents and keep Madison's crimes hidden. With Nate leading the charge, we officially filed a civil suit against Madison and her parents. The legal battle was grueling, each step a stark reminder of how much they had tried to take from me. But as the weeks passed, the tide began to turn. The first crack in their armor came from the most unexpected place, Madison's lover, Brandon. Faced with mounting pressure, Brandon turned on Madison without hesitation, providing testimony that backed up everything Sophia and I had uncovered. His statements confirmed her intentions. She had planned to steal the insurance payout and use it to start a new life in Hawaii, leaving behind nothing but the wreckage of her lies. Vicky and Rick, however, weren't as quick to fold. They tried to spin the narrative, painting themselves as victims, concerned parents who had only been trying to support Madison during a difficult time. But the evidence against them was undeniable. Emails, bank records, and forged documents all pointed to their direct involvement in the scheme. Then came the final blow. Nate uncovered an even deeper layer of deception, one that made my stomach turn. Madison and Vicky hadn't just been after the house, they had also attempted to manipulate my father into signing over other family assets. They had targeted him in moments of confusion, exploiting his dementia to get what they wanted. "This isn't just fraud," Nate said grimly as he laid the documents in front of me. "This is elder abuse. And the courts won't take that lightly." He was right. When the charges were officially filed, the weight of their crimes finally caught up with them. Madison, Vicky, and Rick faced a litany of legal consequences: fraud, property theft, conspiracy. The public exposure was brutal. In our small town, where reputations were everything, theirs were reduced to nothing more than gossip and disgrace. Madison, of course, tried to play the victim. "I didn't know what I was doing," she sobbed during her deposition. "I was grieving. I made mistakes." But no one was buying it. Not the lawyers. Not the judge. And certainly not me. She had made her choices. And now, she was paying for them. In the end, the courts ruled in my favor. The house was officially mine again, along with the remaining assets Madison hadn't managed to siphon away. The life insurance payout, the money she had planned to use for her new life, was frozen and redirected to where it was meant to go, supporting pediatric cancer patients in Liam's name. This wasn't just a legal victory. It was a moral one. Every step of the way, I had fought to protect what mattered most: my son's memory, the legacy he left behind. But even with the battle won, the scars of their betrayal remained. Madison's actions had fractured something deep within me, something that couldn't be easily repaired. She had shown me the depths of her selfishness, and while I had triumphed over her schemes, it had come at a cost. As for Vicky and Rick, they retreated from the public eye, their influence in ruins. They had spent years building their power, only to watch it crumble under the weight of their own greed. I couldn't bring Liam back. But I could make sure Madison and her family never had the chance to hurt anyone else the way they had hurt me. The fallout was complete. The house was safe. The money had been redirected to something that truly mattered. And the people who had tried to destroy me were finally facing the consequences of their actions. But the fight wasn't over. Not for me. Because while the legal battle was behind me, the journey toward healing had only just begun. The house was quiet now, a kind of quiet that settled deep in my chest. For months. The house had been consumed by chaos for months: lawyers, documents, and the crushing weight of betrayal. But now, with the legal battle over and Madison and her family facing the consequences of their actions, a stillness settled over everything. It wasn't peace exactly, but a bittersweet calm, the kind that comes when the storm has passed, even if the wreckage remains. Liam's room was just as he had left it. His favorite stuffed penguin sat on the bed, its worn seams proof of how much he had loved it. The colorful drawings he had carefully taped to the walls were still there, frozen in time. For a moment, I could almost hear his laughter. I sat on the edge of his bed, holding the penguin, letting the memories crash over me like a wave. Winning the case had ensured the house would stay in the family, but it had never been just about the house. It was about Liam's legacy, protecting everything he had loved and making sure his memory became something more than just heartache. That's why I took the life insurance payout, every penny Madison had tried to steal, and put it towards something meaningful. The Liam Thompson Foundation. It would fund pediatric cancer research and support families going through the same nightmare we had endured. It felt right, like something Liam would have wanted. He had always been full of compassion, even when he was the one in pain. The first grant went to the pediatric cancer ward where he had spent so much of his time. I visited the hospital, met the families it would help, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a spark of hope. Liam's name would live on, not just in my heart, but in the lives of those he would continue to touch. But moving forward didn't mean forgetting. On a crisp fall morning, I made my way to the cemetery. The air was cool, leaves crunching under my feet as I approached Liam's grave. His headstone was simple, just the way he would have wanted, with a small engraving of a penguin in the corner. I knelt down, brushing away a few stray leaves, and placed the stuffed penguin at the base of the stone. "You'd be proud, buddy," I whispered. "The house is safe, the foundation's up and running, and your memory is helping so many people. I promise you I'd fix this, and I did." The wind rustled through the trees, and for a fleeting moment, I felt him there, his spirit woven into the world around me. Your grandma outsmarted them all, I added, a faint smile tugging at my lips. She was brilliant, just like you always said. As I stood, I heard slow but steady footsteps behind me. My father. His memory wasn't what it used to be, but today, his eyes were clear. He's at peace now, he said quietly. His voice was steady. I hope so, I replied, my throat tightening. He reached down, his fingers brushing the soft fabric of the penguin. Liam told me something once, he murmured. Not long before he passed. He said, don't worry about Dad. He's stronger than everyone thinks. I swallowed hard, my vision blurring. He said that? My father nodded, a faint smile on his lips. He was right, you know. We stood there in silence, grief and love mingling in the cool autumn air. A monarch butterfly drifted down, landing gently on the headstone, its wings catching the sunlight like stained glass. My father reached out instinctively, but I caught his hand. Let it be, I said softly. The butterfly took flight, spiraling upward, free and unburdened. I watched it until it disappeared, and for the first time, I understood, true strength wasn't in revenge or victory. It was in letting go. I slipped my arm around my father's shoulders, guiding him back toward the car. Pancakes? I asked, a small smile creeping into my voice. His face lit up, a rare moment of clarity shining through. Pancakes. Liam always loved pancakes. Yeah, I said, warmth filling my chest. He did. As we walked away, I glanced back at the penguin standing guard at the headstone. It wasn't just a reminder of Liam, it was a symbol of everything we had fought for. The butterfly had shown me the way forward. It wasn't about forgetting the pain. It was about honoring the love that came with it. And as I drove home with my father, the weight of the past finally began to lift. Liam was gone. But his spirit remained, guiding me toward a life where love and resilience could exist alongside loss. It wasn't triumph. It was survival. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like enough.